Hello, dear ICA friends. On behalf of the ICA France Benelux chapter, I would like to welcome you to our first webinar this year, titled Education-Focused Events, a review of established wisdom and future-focused trends. We will hear it from the experts of online didactics and enabling technologies to broaden our perspective about how people learn, and with technology we need to adapt. I'm pleased to share that we have more than 130 people that registered from 27 countries for this session, so it seems to be a very popular topic. The session has been brought to you by the ICA France Benelux Chapter Education Committee, so I would like to thank the education team for making this possible. Before we start the session, I just wish to share some housekeeping announcement. As you see, we have planned this webinar as a Zoom meeting to keep it more casual, so you can also see each other. For that reason, I would like to ask you to keep yourself muted. And on top of your screen, on the top of right screen, you can just select speaker view so you will see the person speaking. Questions can be asked in the chat, and please note that this session is being recorded. Now I have the pleasure to pass the word to Senthil Gopinath, ICA CEO.
Thank you, Tadeya. Good morning to everybody. It's fantastic to see so many of you. I think this is all about, in these challenging times, bringing our community together. I'm Senthil, the Chief Executive of International Congress and Conventions Association. Congratulations to Tadeya and Ramona for putting this together and the ICA team. We keep insisting in this challenging time that we all need to see us more than ever. Yes, of course, through virtually or digitally, whatever we call. But it's vital we engage, we build the community, keep the community together, and be optimistic to when the reopening date comes, so that we all can kickstart our business. So thank you very much for having me. It's an honor to be here. I always say that chapter meetings and education sessions are the most platform for ICA, where we can share our thoughts, ask our questions, find whatever we are doing right or wrong, discuss with each other and find solutions and move our community and the ICA family together, and most importantly, move our industry together. So I'm glad to be here today with all of you and being a participant. First of all, my sincere thanks to Tadeya and Ramona for driving these kind of initiatives over and over again, keeping the industry moving, and also to thank the Education Committee, Catherine, Anthony, Inge, Eduardo, Charles, and Steve. You guys are doing a great job. I think whatever you hear worldwide, whatever we do worldwide, the best practices, the education has to be shared with our community. So well done to the Education Committee for putting it through. Having said that, let me introduce our moderator, Idia Rhodes, Managing Director of MCI Group, to take it over. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Good morning to all of you. It's good to see many industry friends, although it's still virtual. I know that we're all hoping to be able to meet face-to-face very soon. I think we're counting the days as children are counting for Christmas to come. But let's, for the moment, keep the discussion and the sessions online. So thank you for the ICA Benelux France chapter to put this session together. I had the pleasure to prepare it about 2 weeks ago with the two keynote speakers we're gonna discuss with today. And I have to say that in the beginning, we thought we were going to do a session quite classical with a PowerPoint presentation and a kind of a one-way communication. And then we thought actually we were so engaged and so motivated and so inspired with all the conversation that started to happen that we decided to kind of keep that conversation today in a very, I would say, informal or not formal way, and try to share as much as knowledge as we can in a very inspiring way. So with no more further ado, I would like to introduce the two speakers. First is Chris Stubble. He's a project manager of education and innovation. He works as a senior educationalist and head of education advice and training at RISPO, which is the Erasmus University Rotterdam in the Netherlands. And the second panelist is Thomas Jean, or Jean, I'm not sure of the pronunciation, sorry for that. He's the educational storyteller and extended reality director at the Center of Innovation in Leiden University, also in the Netherlands. So I will start with questions. We would like to invite you to also put questions in the chat room. I will monitor those questions and make sure that we convey all the messages as much as possible. I also read some of the questions that some of you put in the registration system. And I have to say that most of them were about hybrid. And I think that most of us see hybrid as the future, as the solution to all our problems since the pandemic. But before we get into that, first question I have for Chris is, how do you see, or do you see any changes in the education and the way education is being delivered after the COVID, or thanks to the COVID, or because of the COVID, for adults? And if so, which ones?
So thank you for the introduction. Thank you for the question. I noticed that the event industry definitely has the same challenges as the education industry, maybe not the correct word for that, but struggling with things like knowledge transfer, bonding, networking possibilities that students normally do in school or on campus, which dropped out because of COVID. But we also know from educational theory that the traditional way of doing education, the things that we've been doing already for maybe 1,000 years, definitely the last 100 years, of just speaking and doing knowledge transfer, isn't the best way to teach and learn. So the COVID crisis, the Corona crisis, definitely gave a lot of teachers these practical insights that, you know, the way I've been doing education for the last 20 years maybe was not that effective. Teachers transferred from an on-campus, on-site lecturing style of teaching to an online, sometimes even hybrid form of teaching, where knowledge transfer was selected into short clips or quick questions online. And this is something that they learned that probably even worked better than how they did stuff before. So the COVID crisis for educational innovators like me definitely helped teachers to see that innovation definitely can have a good impact on teaching and learning as well. So we definitely see some change happening, and we see change happening everywhere. Also, where teachers were more traditional, now definitely see the advantages of doing more online or hybrid or blended learning and teaching.
And Thomas, how has how is technology helping to this transformation today? I'm looking for, there is Thomas. Yeah,
yes, I am here. Hi, thank you for the invitation. I'm very happy to be there. Actually, can I quickly react to Chris before I answer that
Absolutely.
question? Because it sort of links to each other. Teaching is, of course, one aspect of what college life is about, university life is about, but I think a very big challenge that many teachers face and has faced and still face is that how do they engage their students? And that's, I think, what Chris was also talking about. They didn't really realize what student engagement maybe was about, or not all the time. So if you say, okay, let's go to a classroom and I teach and the students are paying attention and that's engagement, whereas now they realize it might not be completely, that's not completely the way it works. And now they find that a lot of students, even the ones that were paying attention, are also struggling with this online way of teaching. So we had a few teachers who were really focusing not so much on the online content, because they said, actually, that's relatively easy. The real challenge is keeping my students engaged and talking to me and, engaging with the subject matter. And that's, I think, a challenge for any type of educational, work that you do online, is try to keep people there. And I think we all know, this feeling of Zoom fatigue, etc. And that's definitely part of it. But also, let's say if you go to a conference, it's not just the talks that you're attending, it's also interfacing and connecting with peers and other professionals. And that's no different, for instance, for students on campus. Now back to the question, because unless someone
you want me to repeat
react?
the question? Sorry. Okay, I will repeat the question. So my question was, seeing the changes that COVID has brought to the education world, how do you see technology enabling or facilitating that process in trying to engage with the online audience and keep the motivation up?
It's a bit of a, there are two sides to the medallion here, because I think a lot of people are actually seeing it as an obstacle instead of an enabler. And in one way, we know, of course, this is what is making education possible. But, you know, there is, like Chris said, there is this traditional idea of what teaching is. So a lot of teachers were very resistant to it. But now, of course, over the months and more than a year now, they are faced with the fact that they have to do it online. So I see lately that many teachers are starting to experiment as well. So they started with simple classes, you know, one-way sending through the webcam. And now they are trying out new tools. So there are online platforms where you can gather. I attended a class a few weeks ago where we were all robots walking through a sort of jungle, and everyone's webcam was a little screen on your, like that was your face basically. And there was a sort of scavenger hunt aspect to it. And it really felt like, you know, a different way to learn, and something that's not really possible with regular learning. So I think a great aspect of technology is that you can try out new things which weren't, you know, possible before, and you didn't necessarily have the time or the motivation or the incentive to try them out, because, you know, you had your on-campus education that you needed to give, whereas now there is a little bit more motivation to go out and explore new options.
Do you think that technology today is helping to measure the return on education in one way or another? Because moving after, with the transformation, digital transformation due to COVID, we all talk about, especially in our industry, about the importance of data. So is technology in the education world an enabler to measure a return of education in terms of more than credits and exams and rates in the exams, but in terms of understanding of a...
This is a very broad question with a lot of answers, because there were already some systems in place to track student process, and that's been getting more and more, I would say, intense over the years. I remember back when I was in university, I did media studies as part of my course. And they were showing, I don't know if everyone's familiar with Blackboard, but it's basically a learning management system. And this teacher showed us as part of his class what was all being measured about students. So, you know, how long did you spend on this page? Did you download all the readings? Were you there every week? Or, you know, and all these things were taken into account when measuring student performance. Let's say if you're, you know, a maybe case, you know, shall we give him the benefit of the doubt? Let's see what he's been doing online. That would be taken into account. And I think now it's evolved a little bit more where we not just track students for, you know, results, but also in order to help them. So there's a big pilot going on at the University of Leiden, and I think elsewhere as well, where we try to do blended learning. And also sort of personalized learning where you, and I think Chris may know a little bit more about this than me, but on a technological level, you can track individual student performance, which was a little bit more difficult, especially with the larger, you know, courses. So now this is possible. So if you see a student struggling, you can give him you know, extra guidance, whereas other students who are doing fine are, you know, given more challenging material, or are generally just, you know, you leave them alone a little bit more because apparently they're managing. So in that way, I think technology can be used to measure performance. Where it gets a little scary is when you start to measure, you know, attention span and stuff like that, and productivity scores, which Microsoft Teams has recently introduced and also removed because there was a lot of criticism about it. I think then you get into an area of tracking and data mining, which probably isn't in the best interest of the students necessarily.
You made me think of a case we lived in 2020 where we had an association that was organizing a normal congress in the past, face-to-face with more than 10,000 attendees, big exhibition, etc. and they had to move to the virtual world in 2020, like this.
Mhm.
And most of the associations, what they did is that they went into a classical virtual, I think it might sound as an oxymoron, but in a way it was a classical virtual event where it was quite still top down, one way, etc. What this association did, they introduced AI, and it was when attendees were registering to the Congress, they were looking and they had to put information in their profile in terms of level of interest, topics, career length, etc. And then the platform that itself was bringing them sessions that they thought, that the platform thought, according to the algorithm, that it would be interesting for them to attend, and be that session either an official session of the association Congress or a session sponsored by one of the corporate sponsors. And that was a way to kind of help the experience of the participant to drive through that huge virtual event and choose among more than 120 speakers and get into their interest in terms of in a kind of an automatic or technological way. So it was very successful, actually.
That's an interesting concept. I think that's something that actually could work, especially for larger events, because there is a lot to choose from, and that's actually, in a way, also an issue for our students as well, because they have the liberty to choose in a certain area of their curriculum to choose any subject they want, and they have trouble finding things that they would find really interesting because there's just so much on offer. And in that way, I think a correctly programmed artificial intelligence assistant would be a really big help. And I think that's pretty much the same as what you were just describing.
I have a question for Chris. You talked about traditional teachers. And I think that's something that is very similar in our industry, where we have a lot of speakers that are traditional speakers. They are key opinion leaders. They are above 60, 65. And the way they transmit their knowledge and they transfer that knowledge is always the same, is as the way they did in the university 20 years ago. And when they go to a Congress, they just speak the same way, which can be quite boring. And I think that's a question that is relevant for both the virtual and the face-to-face interactions, because we're going to move at some point into talk about the future being hybrid. So how do you help those speakers to move away from the traditional way of speaking and to become much more engaging and motivating and to the audiences?
Well, that's indeed a very tricky and sometimes even scary discussion you need to have with these content matter experts. They're used to having a lot of respect and a lot of credit for what they're doing on stage. They're beautiful speakers, and they really can most of the time engage large audiences on location. And this also, I think, has to do with what Thomas just said. You can, with technology, when you transform these events online or hybrid, you can measure stuff. And sometimes these teachers say, when I do stuff online, people are not watching my video, people don't react to my questions, people don't post any remarks. So this online situation doesn't work for me. I can only engage people when I'm on location in front of a large group. But what these teachers most of the time don't see is that they don't measure the old situation with the same way as they measure the new situation, because research shows pretty clearly that from the maybe 60, 100, maybe 600 people in the room, not everybody's paying that much attention as well. Although the teacher thinks that he is addressing all of them and everybody's engaged, the online situation makes it really measurable what people are actually doing. And there's a lot of studies that show that people, when they exit a class, when they were listening to a teacher for 40 minutes, they actually don't remember most of the time anything, maybe just only the first 10 minutes and the last 10 minutes of the lecture. So how to convince these teachers to change their approach and both approaches can be changed, the online approach and the on-situ, the on-campus approach, is to show them what actually students are remembering or doing, and telling them, you know, it's much more effective to cut up in chunks, or even to just ask questions instead of speaking all the time, to engage people mentally, to do some thought experiments, to do some engaging activities. And when they feel that when they do this in practice, and you help them making this transformation, because that is also something very important. I think you can't just tell them you have to change the way you have to do it. You have to help them a lot of implementing, of designing, of developing the new approach, and also to be there at their side when they're implementing this new situation. And when they experience actually that they can achieve much more than just by lecturing, that makes them convinced of maybe trying to do another approach. But it is not something that you can just do from one day on the other. And which is also, I think, very important, there's no one-size-fits-all approach. Every teaching situation, or let's say lecturing situation, is a unique event. It is on a specific time of day for a specific audience, with a specific goal, with a specific teacher, with a specific context. So you cannot repeat everything all the time again and again. And that is also something that they most of the time don't like to hear, because that means that they will have to redesign every lecture, every keynote, every educational get-together in another way, and that takes time and effort, of course. So unfortunately, I do not have like a magic toolbox, and I just need to help them design and develop and implement every single time they want to achieve certain goals.
Which brings me to the question that Tadeja is putting in the chat room, which is, there are different styles of learning. So it's styles of teaching, but also styles of learning. And I think it would be interesting if you could share that with all of us, because I had the pleasure to go through that process with MPI many years ago, and I found it extremely enlightening. So, and her question is, how in the current time, online learning, can we accommodate it, or can we accommodate all those styles?
Yeah.
And if that's even possible, and how can then technology enable that process or facilitate?
So for the learning styles, theory has been debunked already a few times. So there is definitely no different styles of learning. There's different preferences of learning. Mm-hmm. So some people like to listen, some people like to walk around, some people like to talk to people, some people like to dive into the subject, maybe be creative. But there's definitely not a certain style of learning that fits a certain situation best. And in short, what I can say is, if you have to study French words, you just need to drill and practice. If you want to study how to read a map, it's a different kind of skill. So you need to adapt to different styles of learning. You probably have some preferences, but there's no different styles of learning. And that's why I think what I said is, what you need to do is really design an event or an educational gathering with a certain specific goal in mind. And this goal you design with the target group in mind. So you definitely have to take into account that every situation will be different. And being in charge of what you want your audience to be doing, or what you want your audience to learn, and really think through all the motivational and engaging aspects and design aspects you need to go through, thinking about how the brain works, even how engagement works, how student motivation works. These are the things that need to be taken into account, and not bother teachers with theories that has been debunked, like things like learning styles.
Okay, thank you.
Can I also add something to that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it's also, I think, the question that Catherine asked also is relevant here. So can you inspire students? I think these two are connected. I think, first of all, if you want to accommodate your students, it's always good to give them a variety of ways in which they can, consume the learning material. So let's say some people, like Chris said, like to read about it. Some people like to hear about it. If I like to walk around, so a podcast is for me a very good format. So I think in a way, not just being connected to a classroom, but, you know, being forced to offer the same learning content in different ways is already a very good thing for some students. What about inspiration? Because, you know, an inspiring teacher can really change our lives. So if you see someone who is talking very passionately about something you maybe not or really interested in, but now you become interested in, is there a substitute for that? I've done a lot of online courses. I've recorded them with many teachers, and I see the best teachers are also just good teachers in front of the classroom, and they find a way to convey their enthusiasm. So we had a teacher, I'll give you a few examples of our practice. So we had a teacher who is a biology teacher and who teaches about evolution, and now and that's already, it can be a dry subject, it can be an interesting subject, but he went and started vlogging in the forest and different areas. And we also went with him into a forest and started hunting for snails. And it sounds very banal, but it worked really well because it's like an enthusiastic biology guy on site, and they're just picking off these different snails from different areas in the grass and showing how the shells are changed and what it does to survival rates and stuff like that. And then you really get this sort of energy going. And especially if you can do it live. In this case, we did one live where, you know, it didn't work always that well because we were out in nature, so the connection wasn't great, but the students could ask questions, and it's much more interesting and inspiring than staying inside a classroom. Another example that I want to give is when we have the medical center here with a lot of medical interns, which are not allowed to go inside the hospital right now because of COVID, of course. So, and, you know, they're often students, they're in students' homes. There was, you know, a few outbreaks, and so they brought COVID back into the hospital. So it's a bad situation. So they're studying off-site now, but they're missing a big part of their education, which is going, you know, along with doctors and visiting patients. So we solved this in different ways. We tried a few pilots with AR goggles, but in the end, the most easy way was everyone has Teams on their phone, so you could just use Teams to stream, and we used a sort of a rig. And then the students can ask questions. And then a sharp doctor teacher suddenly thought, oh, we are not restricted to our normal rounds now, because we can also go into these wards that are normally off limits for medical interns, for instance, with really rare diseases or, you know, very fragile patients. And normally interns are just not allowed because it's too dangerous, but it's an important part of the education. So they were struggling with this already. And now this teacher realized I can actually show them things that I couldn't show them before. And that's another example of how technology can inspire and can enrich your life, or like your students' life, but it takes a crisis, unfortunately, to get people to realize that.
Yeah, and I think you bring a very important aspect, that is that no matter what, the human being is the most important thing. So you need to be a good communicator. So which is not linked to technology. At the end of the day, is linked to the person itself. Mm-hmm. So I think that we should move now to the hybrid part. COVID is today is the situation we have at present, but we are looking forward to the vaccination programs and making sure that everybody can start traveling again and having face-to-face interactions. And what we see in our industry is that hybrid is the future. Now, there is a lot of things around hybrid, and I would like first to know from your side, Chris, if you're also seeing from an educational point of view, the interaction of the online and the offline world, and how do you see that? Is it happening at the same time? Is it in terms of the different type of objectives of the educational program, as you said, linked to the audience? Can you give us a little bit more of information on that and share your experience?
Yeah. So before I go into how do I look at hybrid events and how it's been done at our university, I would like to just say one more thing, that for a lot of teachers and students, the current situation is considered a tragedy. You know, the things are not being done as I'm used to it was done. I'm not learning as well anymore. And people are really scared for the future of learning with technology. The online situation looks very bad, and for a lot of situations, the hybrid even looks very scary. A lot of teachers don't want to teach in a hybrid setting because they need to divide their attention to an online and an on-site situation. But I also consider that the old situation was a big tragedy. And then you just look at in higher education, how many students passed their first year in learning. Some of our schools at the university take pride in flunking 60% of their first year students, because then they think they have a great educational approach, because then only the smart people survive. And that's really tragic, because that means that our old situation, where there's been a lot of lecturing and a lot of maybe like some interaction in group work, doesn't fit a lot of our students as well. So I think we need to be honest and say that we need to really reconsider the old educational situation and not only just be critical about the new one. So what did we learn at the university for our hybrid situation? Well, I think it is my personal view that I consider hybrid events as a temporary solution to an emergency situation. And then I'm talking about learning, of course, the situation in education. It was, for a lot of teachers, a nice quick fix to reach out to a lot of students that were not able to be present on campus. So they basically decided to cut the class in half and have one half of the class follow a course online, whilst the other half of in class was actually in class. So teachers could communicate, but for teachers, as I said, it was very difficult to spread their attention over the two different kind of groups, because it's a different kind of group. That's we need to be honest about that. People online have a completely different experience than people on site. But also for students, it was not fun at all. There were advantages for the on-site group of being able to ask quick questions to the students, personal contact, maybe even interact with each other in a more informal way. But for the online students, there was a lot of opportunities, for example, to share within in a chat some conversations and some questions, like that's what's happening here. Teachers could do polling, for example, in the online situation. So there were advantages and disadvantages for both groups. So in my personal opinion, I think a hybrid teaching could work very well for a specific kind of situation where you need to have two different kind of groups present at the same time. But I don't think it's a sustainable solution in education, because there are so many advantages in an on-site situation and an online situation that are so separate that having to redesign higher education in a fully hybrid way, I think you will lose the advantages of both, and the groups that are on site will be taken hostage by the group online, and vice versa as well. So you can't take the max out of both unique situations, I think.
And Thomas, do you see technology enabling that in one way or another?
Well, I think there's a little bit of a difference between voluntary and less voluntary education, in the sense that if you're a student and you are not allowed to go to school, but your peers are, because of they are closer or whatever, then it feels like you are at a disadvantage. Like Chris said, if you say, okay, I want to attend a conference, I am in the Netherlands, the conference is in Japan, I can do two things. I can take a plane, get a hotel, stay there, or I can choose to stay at home and follow it digitally. I think there may be at least less of a feeling of, not being included properly, because what Chris said, it is true, and technology is not a magic bullet in this sense. I get the feeling that a lot of people are pinning their hopes on hybrid events, but I think if you experience the frustration of not being able to engage fully with a teacher or a workshop or work work group or something like that, you understand why it can't be a full replacement. Having said that, you could choose to say, let's do a session twice, and we'll do an on-site physical one, and we'll do a digital one, for instance. So you just split them up, which offers similar content, but then you have this opportunity to exploit the advantages that both settings offer. And I think that would be a viable alternative to just, well, you know, often hybrid events just means streaming the event as well as, you know, giving it in a physical way.
Yeah, and I think that's what is key in moving forward in our industry, is that first of all is how we all understand hybrid. And I think that in everybody's mind there is a different definition today. I agree with both of you. For the moment, we're seeing hybrid as being partly, you know, physical and then being streamed, and then people being able to connect at the same time is not good. It's difficult, and it's very difficult, especially for the speaker, and also how you engage with an online audience at the same time as with a physical audience. So what we and that's important because in a way, are we talking about the end of those big congresses that every destination was hoping to get? And I'm playing a little bit devil's advocate, so don't shoot the messenger. Mm-hmm. But it's okay, those big congresses that everybody was looking at having and hosting in their destination with 10,000, 20,000 attendees, that was bringing, of course, a lot of revenues to the destination and to all the stakeholders, because 20,000 people, they need to eat, to interact, to if they stay in a hotel, you name it. So, and when we look at hybrid from our perspective in our industry, we think that it's going to be, events will still happen, but it will be smaller. And that at the end of the day, people, yes, you're in Utrecht and you want to go to Japan, you will go to Japan if you think that there you can meet people that you definitely have to meet in order to advance in your professional life or in your business life, because also events are there for commercial purposes. So, and others who maybe in the past were going just because it was nice to travel and nice to get some education insights, they would stay at home, but then get the content eventually that has been recorded and therefore is distributed afterwards. And that has a different business model, a different registration fee, etc., a different exposure, but also, or they could, and they will attend some live sessions from home, but are more like less interactive, like a keynote or an inspirational speaker who brings an hour of content, and that's it. So that's how we see hybrid. And what we think is that also associations will have to think about what Chris was saying before, is how you do your event design according to the type of audiences you want to reach and according to what the objectives of that educational session will be. But there are areas such as networking, as you said, Thomas, in the beginning, that will be very difficult to keep it in a blended way. How do you network with people being on site, you being at home? That's going to be very complicated. And you can use, I don't know, maybe technology will bring that at some point, but I don't, for the moment.
Well, I've seen ways that people are trying to solve this issue. So I've attended a conference where you had this sort of, you can look up after, you know, you've met someone, you can look that person up, everyone registered in the app, and then you can sort of send a message through that app to say, okay, I'm interested in talking a little bit further, and then you can set up a private meeting with that person. It kind of works. I mean, it doesn't always work. If you have a session with 1,000 people, you know, attending, and you know, let's say half of them sends the speaker a note, then he's booked for weeks, you know, so it doesn't always work, but it was a kind of a nice way. I think the central advantage of hybrid events is choice, in the sense that, let's say I'm on a budget, so I can't attend, you know, many events. So then I have to choose which one I want to attend. Whereas I can now choose to say, okay, let's go to that one, to the physical conference, because I really need to talk to some people, but I can sort of spread my budget out over a few online events as well. So now I have a little bit more choice, and I can actually attend more, you know, workshops or lectures than I could before. Or, you know, let's say I'm from a background and I don't have a budget to go to any conferences, and now there are some available online for, let's say, a lower price, then, you know, so there's a lot more choice for people to attend different events as well. And I think that's a big advantage of hybrid events as opposed to on-site events, as well as for education, by the way.
Yeah, I agree with Choice, although I think today is still too early to know if the educational providers in our industry, which are most like associations, will keep that format in the future, or if at some point they will naturally go to what they know best, which is face-to-face meetings. And we've been advising some associations to really consider virtual and the use of technology, and also to with what Chris was saying beforehand, is also to teach, or at least try to coach their speakers to be able to also be engaging online, which is very different. It's because the body language doesn't play a role, etc. And but they see that as a short-term thing. For the moment, they see it as a short-term value proposition to compensate for the fact that today we cannot travel, and that at some point they will go back to face-to-face. And that is very difficult to see if the change will be, and therefore the choice will be, part of our lives in 23 and 24. That it's I don't know if the audience has another perspective, but from what we see so far is complicated. They said, well, we'll see. For the moment, yes, we have virtual because there is no other things, but at some point we will go to a live event without virtual or without online, if you want, value proposition, or in a way also competition.
But isn't it dependent on how these associations define success? If you define success as we need to facilitate networking or bonding with clients or products or provided services, I think it's a very normal way of thinking. Then you go back to the old situation, because bonding with the product or the service, and exchange of ideas, networking is something that can be done very well in an on-campus or an on-site situation. But if what Thomas is saying, if people attend a conference to learn, to know about, to get inspired, and an association maybe measures that success factor. Does my audience now know more about me, about the services I provide, about the products I sell? And one way or the other can measure that. And then maybe it is not so bad after all that a lot of these participants were online or in a hybrid setting. But it all depends on what you measure as a success in your event. So I think, yes, physical will definitely stay if the success factor is bonding with a product or a service or networking. But if a success should be, I just want to share my ideas to the world, and I want people to know about me and to learn, then I think an online event can be very successful as well, or a hybrid event or a blended event.
Thomas, do you want to react? Because I would like to react, but first you go first.
Well, I was thinking maybe if you stick too much to simulating what exists or existed, then it kind of obstructs your thinking a little bit. So an example of an alternative would be at the Center for Innovation back in 2015, we started experimenting really with online education, some on-campus education. So for instance, the things that could be done online, let's say, make a video about it and then discuss it in class, instead of wasting, is maybe not the right word, but spending time in class on it. But I think a more interesting example is we have MOOCs. So those are massive online courses that are attended by hundreds of thousands of learners. And how do you make them feel connected? So we spend a lot of time trying to get students connected to each other through, they have messaging boards, but also through the teachers, and the teachers are actively involved and they respond to questions of the learners, which are from all over the world. And it creates in some of our courses this community of people that start to know each other better start to cooperate. And that's a different way of enabling online tools to create a community and create a feeling of community and networking, because you're basically judging each other by what people are posting and saying and reacting to, and how they engage with the subject matter, and not necessarily because you just bump into each other. So it's a different way of creating a community, and I think that's a valid way as well. But it's not necessarily an event, although some of these online courses actually did end up in online events, because apparently they didn't realize that there was this community for which they could organize.
And yeah, I agree. And I think that if we think of associations as education providers for professionals, I think that at the end they will have to diversify their products portfolio, and they will have to also to keep on having face-to-face meetings that they will be enhanced with technology. And I have a question towards the end of the, because we're getting to the end of the session today. So I have a question for both of you on that aspect. But those type of sessions and of events, and on top of that, also developing online courses, online experiences that will also facilitate and meet the objectives of some of their members and other stakeholders, and create an online community that will also bring value to the overall experience. So I think it's they will have to consider both moving forward, and that will also define different models, but also different type of speakers, different type of staff for the association as well, and different type of interactions with the suppliers in the whole supply chain, like such as convention bureaus and conference centers and etc. So linked to that, I have a question for both of you. I know you don't come from our industry, but we had a discussion, and you know that at the end of the day, out of a face-to-face event, we'll have a lot of stakeholders in our industry that they have based their business model on. And how do you see now, or do you see any changes that destinations such as cities or convention centers have to think about in putting in place in order to be able to respond to the needs of hybrid events in the future? From I don't know, it can be a technological point of view, but also it can be, if you think about the convention center, the way meeting rooms are set up, or the way, you sometimes you have those big exhibition halls, you have big plenary meeting rooms with more than 2,000, 3,000 seats there, and that space that costs money to maintain. So do you see any change on that area? And is technology changing that as well?
Me or Thomas?
Whoever wants to start.
Thomas?
Yeah, sure. I think what people need to look out for is, if they choose to go back to the way it was, that there will be other players who won't do that, who will focus on offering, let's say, hybrid events and a really good online infrastructure and indeed tools. And I think you can really miss the boat on these new developments here. I think if there are indeed large conference venues or change that are now considering just to go back to the way it was, they really, I think, in a few years might struggle a little bit, because they will get competition from providers that really help to give you a smooth online virtual conference, because it's we've tasted the forbidden fruit, so it's now people are used to it and maybe want this kind of virtual event as well, especially once we've cooled down, after we can all go outside again. We start to realize there were a few things that we liked about online events, and if you are not investing in it now, then I think in a few years' time you will start to fall by the wayside, because other people will do it.
Chris?
Yes. So one of the most innovative university in the United States, voted, I think, for the 7th year in a row, is Arizona State University, being more innovative than MIT. And they have more students online than they have on campus. So they have an online study program and they have an on-campus study program. And they told me that a few years ago, they couldn't imagine the impact the online situation has for their own, not buildings or technology, but for the services they need to provide to their online students. So suddenly they needed to train online coaches, they needed to train online assessors, they needed to have data analysts present to read what our students are doing online, to get conclusions, to get conclusions out of this, to reach out to the students online, to nudge them, to tell them and call them, you're not doing anything anymore in this online situation. Are you doing okay? So these different kind of roles and different kind of interventions. So for example, what they did, very easy, what they noticed is after an online class, they just didn't close the Zoom off or the team session off, but they left it open so students could stay in the Zoom and connect with each other. And these were all extra new things they figured out that worked very well in the online situation. So new roles and new types of interventions. And definitely, as Thomas is saying, not try to return back to the old situation, because there will be new roles and new interventions, and thus also new players there that will take that position. So be in charge of your own future, I think, is very important, and have analyze the situation and see what you need definitely to keep your attendees engaged and connected to the service and product you're providing.
Yeah, I'm conscious of time, so I think it's what you both said, it's very important. And what I take from there is that indeed there is not, I don't think, I agree with you, there's not going to go back to the old situation. I think we will all love to have that, but that we have to be realistic. We started to see it in our company, for example, where we see that all of a sudden we don't need the profiles we had in terms of staff that we had in the past. And now we have to go for new staff that are very technology savvy, that are super open-minded, and they come from different industries, because it's a way to also shake us up and make us think differently in how we can apply technology, and getting out of what we understand, the canvas we knew until now. So the canvas is changing. I think our clients, and at the end of the day, we're talking the associations, and the members of the associations are also changing. I think associations are more, sometimes they take more time to change, but they will have to change their business model. And that if their business model changes, the business model of the suppliers that live out of that will also have to change. They will have to indeed have hybrid interactions, online interactions, and still face-to-face. I told you when we met 2 weeks ago that I'm a profound believer of the human being and of the emotional side of things. And I think that at the end of the day, we're all learners, and we only learn if it is touched, or we're also touched emotionally, because we think that is also helping us to change things in life, personally or professionally. So at some point there will be face-to-face. How long will it take to bring back those events of 40,000 people? We don't know. Will they come back? We don't know that either. I think that the last point is we also have to learn from other industries. You come from another industry, it's adjacent to ours, but it's very interesting, and it's also very stimulating and make us think differently. And there are other industries, as the ICT industry, that also has a lot of events, and they've been using technology much more advanced than others, like medical associations, and they also need to be inspired from each other.
I think not even inspired, I think you should work together. So what happened in education is that usually it was the monopoly of the teacher, but now suddenly education between teamwork, between educational pioneers like Thomas, educational designers, audio video experts, students, they were all involved in designing this new idea of education we have now. And I think the event industry should also look at what's happening in, I don't know, the broadcasting industry, or what's happening in the sports industry, what's happening in education, what we're doing now, and not just get inspired, but involve these people in designing this new reality.
Absolutely.
Because the expertise people like Thomas have, or what the broadcasting industry has gained the last few months, I think is very valuable to revamp the industry you're in.
And also the media industry.
I agree with that, Chris. And I think one of the best decisions that we made a long time ago was to always involve the end user. So in our case, it's mostly students and of course teachers, but mostly students, because otherwise you design for them and not with them. And that's such a big difference. And the quality in our education has really improved since we started always to involve students from a very early stage of the project. You miss such obvious things if you're not part of the actual experience. So the medical intern thing I was talking about, the students actually came up with a lot of sort of possibilities in order to improve this whole setup. And this is something that we see everywhere. So I think in the case of, events, conference, that kind of thing, the experience of the attendees is really invaluable to make informed decisions for the future.
Well, I'm conscious of time. I was told that at 55 we had to hand it over to Ramona. So I would like to thank both of you. I think you have inspired me, as I said the last time we met also. So I hope that the purpose of the session was to help us to think differently and to also accept whether we like it or not. And I know in the chat some people were not agreeing that the world has changed and that we will have to look at our business models, and because the business models of our clients are also changing, because the needs of the customers of our clients are also changing. So thank you, Thomas, and thank you, Chris. And Ramona, I hand it over to you.
Thank you, Idoia. We have come to the end of our session, and we hope that the panel discussion has been useful and informative to all of you. I must say I was very much looking forward to this discussion, and I feel, as you, and I hope as you all, very inspired. On behalf of the France Benelux chapter, I would like to thank everyone for such a fascinating discussion today. Very interesting to have these two industries to work together. Thank you, Idoia, Chris, and Thomas for having accepted to be our speakers, and special thanks go to our chapter education committee for putting together such a great program. I would also like to thank ICA for keeping our community together. And a big thank you to all of you for joining us today. You have been a great audience. We would like to request a few more seconds from your time for a quick survey, which will just pop up in a few seconds. Indeed, your feedback is very important to us. We are looking forward to seeing you at our upcoming events and hopefully in person soon. But before saying goodbye, I have the pleasure to officially release the dates of the 2021 France Benelux Chapter Summit, which will take place from September 6th to September 7th in the beautiful city of Hasselt in Belgium, in a hybrid format, around the theme, The Art of Reinventing. Be assured we prepare a great event, and I'm saying goodbye to all of you, and take good care. So, Girana, the survey can come on.
I think there is something wrong with the poll. Sorry, I think I cannot pull it up at the moment.
Well, if it doesn't work, then we might be able to send it afterwards.
Yes, let's do that.
Sorry.
We're sorry for the technical problem, guys, but thank you for staying on for a couple more minutes. We will make sure that we send it out to everyone who was on the meeting. No problem.
We will do like this, no problem.
Thank you.
Thank you again to all the audience and speakers.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.